Hello, my name is Olu Osha. Uh, I've been talking about US presidents and I've talked about the evolution of our party system and I've been talking about the divergent doctrines underpinning the formation and evolution of these parties. I've talked about the party machines and the boss system, the party bosses who became kingmakers. I talked about Tammany Hall, which represented the democratic machine. And I also talked about the kingmaker in the Republican Party, Roscoe Conkling. Now, I the last video I did, I talked about the Gilded Age. Now, the Gilded Age coincided with much of the Reconstruction era, and Reconstruction was brought about after the end of the Civil War. Now, talking about kingmakers, there's a particular influential figure that I want to discuss today, and that's Roscoe Conkling. Roscoe Conkling was a kingmaker. He was one of the party bosses, and he's a very interesting character. Now, we talked about the negatives of the party bosses, and of course, influence peddling, and those are things that are horrifying to us today. But this was the way things were back then. Remember, the spoil system wasn't exactly started by the Republican Party; it was started by the Democrats under Andrew Jackson, and he abused the spoil system. But by the time of the Civil War, of course, you've heard the phrase "to the victor go the spoils." So after the Civil War, the Republican Party, they were the dominant party now because the Democrats were, mainly in the South, and this where they were facing Reconstruction, and they were under the supervision of federal troops. And so, of course, the leading political figures in the Republican Party, they felt, well, that the spoil system was for them to reward the loyalists within the party fold. And of course, it was really abused, and it was the abuse with the assassination of James Garfield. Of course, the spoil system was implicated because his assassin, the lunatic Charles Guiteau, had actually said that, well, he killed President Garfield because, he expected he would have gotten a job when Garfield was successful. And he expected that in killing him, that Chester A. Arthur, who had been a main beneficiary of the spoil system, as a collector of the Port of New York, Guiteau expected that now that Chester A. Arthur was going to be president, that he would actually reward Guiteau with a job. Of course, that was delusional. They had no agreement, no initial conspiracy or anything like that. The Guiteau was just delusional. And when Chester A. Arthur now became president, one of the things he did was he decided to reform the civil service and make it merit based and end the spoils system, where you know the president rewarded loyalists within the party with jobs, and those people, when they got their jobs, their federal government jobs, they actually paid a portion of their income to the political party. So of course, there's a lot of bribery going on. So in any event, I want to talk about Roscoe Conkling today. Why is Roscoe Conkling important? He's not a president. I'm talking about U.S. president, but it's right. But he was a kingmaker. He was actually influential in selecting um, a number of presidents. He was influential with President Grant. He was influential with Chester A. Arthur, had been his protege, and Chester A. Arthur, had uh, been nominated as the had been picked as the vice president of James Garfield, who unfortunately, he was when he was assassinated, Chester A. Arthur became president. Now, so it wasn't like he planned for James Garfield to be killed. In fact, Chester A. Arthur, because he was a known protege uh, of Roscoe Conkling, party leaders had chosen Chester A. Arthur a uh, as a vice president to appease Roscoe Conkling, right? Because he wasn't happy, he wasn't exactly pleased that was James Garfield was going to be, was going to be president because he did not belong to the stalwart faction, right? Remember the factionalism that had happened within the Republican Party, with the stalwarts who were they were against civil service reform, and then there were the half breeds who were for civil service reform. Now, James Garfield was not a stalwart, right? He was in the Republican Party, but he wasn't a stalwart. So the party leaders tried to appease Roscoe Conkling by selecting uh, Chester A. Arthur, who had no prior political ambitions, right? Up until that time, he had no ambitions whatsoever to be president, but they tried to appease Roscoe Conkling by taking his protege and making him vice president. In any event, at the same time, Roscoe Conkling had wanted to be president at one time. He tried to run in 1876, and something interesting happened. He actually was the one who uh, he nominated Rutherford B. Hayes, thinking that he would use it to detract from his main opponent's votes. I think his main opponent was James Blaine, and Blaine was he was really a nemesis uh, of Roscoe Conkling. There was no love lost between both of them. But things didn't turn out the way Roscoe Conkling had planned it, and Rutherford B. Hayes ended up actually securing the Republican Party's nomination, and eventually Roscoe Conkling was influential in drafting the Electoral Commission Act, which selected Rutherford B. Hayes as president ultimately. And of course, there was a compromise of 1877, in which Rutherford B. Hayes said in exchange for the South accepting the Democrats, and of course that's the South accepting his presidency, he would pull out federal troops. And of course, that was the end of the Reconstruction era. However, prior to that, Roscoe Conkling had been very, very significant in the drafting of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, and of course, it became a part of our Constitution. The 14th Amendment has three main features, right? It defines U.S. citizenship. It also provides for a due process clause and equal protection of the law clause. There's a video in which I discussed the 14th Amendment, so I'm not going to go into the details of the 14th Amendment. But today, with the immigration thing going on and the attempts of the administration to actually revoke citizenship, birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment, it's in our Constitution, and it says, that can't be done. So the 14th Amendment was very important. And Roscoe Conkling, I decided to talk about Roscoe Conkling, even though he wasn't a president. His attempt to become president wasn't successful, but he was a kingmaker. He did pick some U.S. presidents. His influence was that influential, but also he was one of the main drafters of the 14th Amendment, which is very important, right? And he also argued forcibly and made sure it was passed. He was very powerful in the Senate during his era. Now, Roscoe Conkling, as I said, he was a member of the Stalwart Party and the Stalwart faction of the Republican Party. Of course, the Stalwarts, the main thing was that they didn't want civil service reform. They wanted to, continue to abuse the spoil system. But prior to them being stalwarts, they had been a faction known as the radical arm of the Republican Party, right? And Roscoe Conkling had been one of them. The radicals wanted equal rights for the newly freed slaves. They wanted immediate equal rights. They wanted an end of slavery. They also wanted to punish the white Southerners, those who had been Confederates. They thought that their rights should be, uh, that they should diminish their rights as citizens because they'd committed treason. So they were rather extreme. But importantly, though, they advocated for the passing of the 14th Amendment, and Roscoe Conkling was very instrumental. He was very significant in this regard. Now, regarding the 14th Amendment, Roscoe Conkling is also known for having done something a little bit more infamous, right? He The 14th Amendment does not protect does not grant equal rights and equal protection to just human beings. But Roscoe Conkling would later argue that corporations were persons as well, and within the context of the 14th Amendment. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to, just take a little time and talk about the positives of the 14th Amendment, which Roscoe Conkling, the party boss from New York, was instrumental in providing us. Roscoe Conkling was a brilliant lawyer. He won a number of landmark cases, and it's rather interesting that he was actually offered the position of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court by Chester A. Arthur. He was not just offered Chief Justice of the Supreme Court by Chester A. Arthur, but the Senate actually voted and they confirmed him, but he declined it. Prior to that, he had been offered positions on the Supreme Court twice by President Grant. He declined it every time because he liked his power, his political power within the party, and also he liked what he was doing in the as a senator. And it's kind of funny because Roscoe Conkling was also often implicated with the corruption that was going on during the railroads, the bond and all that stuff. So it would have been rather bizarre that someone preserving the virtues and integrities of our judiciary should be the chief should be the chief advocate, and had a history of having sullied his hands in the political corruption and scandals of the era. But anyway, I don't know. But uh, back to the 14th Amendment, the equal protection of the law. I've been doing these videos, just taking us into the history of our country. And, when you're talking about the history of our presidents, you get to see the laws and the values that frame us, right? And something significant as I talk about the 14th Amendment, I've been talking about how uh, my due process rights were violated in Montgomery County, Maryland. Now, importantly, Montgomery County, Maryland, and their judges, they violated my due process rights. They violated my equal protection of the law, or my rights of equal protection of the law. And this happened on May 16, 2023. Pretextually, the police came to raid me, ambush me, they gaslighted me, claiming that there was an emergency evaluation petition. So an emergency evaluation petition is a document in Maryland in which somebody makes an accusation. It's supposed to be used for only someone who has a mental illness, right? Because we have protections, right? Due process of law says you can't take away my liberty, my property, my freedom without due process of law. There's no exception, right? And it also guarantees me equal protection of the law. Equal protection means that you have to treat us all the same, equally, apply the law equally. You can't target me. So when you use an emergency evaluation petition, it's an emergency, right? It actually breaks away from, it deviates from the provisions within the Constitution, right? Because you're saying that there's something, there's an emergency situation, and it's an exception, right? So, but it's the burdens on the state to be able to prove, to be able to give that justification, the rational basis for being able to take away somebody's rights, that are enshrined in the Constitution, his due process and equal protection, right? So an emergency petition is used for only someone who has a mental illness, right? First of all, and they're dangerous, right? They're about to kill somebody or they're about to kill themselves, right? Now, none of these, so it's incumbent on the state to be able to prove those things. So obviously, I never harmed anybody. It was something that was pretextual. The state can't use what's called ipse dixit, right? The emergency petition was something that was it was someone took the petitioner, that's Jide Iwari, right? Jide Iwari may have been a lunatic. The state didn't know that. In fact, he's delusional, right? But he took an oath saying such and such a thing happened, right? Without any proof, without proving it, just an oath. And that's what the state, the state said, well, we're going to take his word for it. Just an oath, right? And the state comes and ambushes me, they take away my rights. I never get notice. Due process in this case still means that, okay, they want to confine me somewhere. Well, they need to give me notice. They need to give me a chance to dispute it, and they also need to give me an impartial judge. None of these things happened, so my due process of law rights were all violated, right? And of course, I was targeted. Now, if I'm having an opportunity to dispute why they shouldn't take me away, I should be able to call my witnesses, call my family, and my family would say, well, first of all, Jide Iwari is not my uncle. Jide Iwari is insane. I don't have a mental illness. They haven't seen anything. I'm not violent. I'm not dangerous. I'm not trying to kill myself. I'm not trying to kill anybody, right? None of these things were given to me in the state of Maryland or Montgomery County. So my due process of law rights were all violated. My equal protection rights were all violated. I want to keep this video short, so I'll probably get into more details talking about how my 14th Amendment rights were violated in Montgomery County and by Judge James Bonifant and Judge Bibi Berry, right? Now, under this equal protection of the law and due process, the 14th Amendment, when we're talking about the rational basis for making that exception, for violating that law, right, you have to have a valid and justifiable basis, right? So I've said, and I can prove that Jide Iwari, everything he wrote was a fabrication. It was a lie. So it was not valid, right? And there's got to be consequences for for perjuring a document. Montgomery County has yet to act regarding the perjury of Jide Iwari, right? He made a bad faith oath that was just a fabrication. It was falsified. It was an act of perjury. So, but my rights have been violated, right? My 14th Amendment rights have been violated, and I've been dehumanized. All the constitutional rights have been violated as well. So I want to keep this video short. I'll probably try and do another video, and I'll talk more about the application of the 14th Amendment to my case. So I talked about our president and somebody who never got to be president, but he was a kingmaker, and that's Roscoe Conkling. And he was very instrumental in the development, the drafting, and passage of the 14th Amendment. It's a very powerful document. Historically, it first protected the rights of freed slaves. It first said they were citizens, and so it automatically overturned the Dred Scott decision of Chief Justice Taney. Interestingly, Chief Justice Taney, who gave the Dred Scott decision and said, I think it was in 1857 or so, thereabout. Don't quote me on that. But he was the one who said that, people of African descent, could not be American citizens, right? And they didn't have any rights that a white man was obligated to, to respect. And Chief Justice Taney, interestingly, is from Maryland as well, the state that has violated my 14th Amendment rights. So I'm going to do other videos. I want to keep this short. So I was just talking about Roscoe Conkling, the party boss who was very instrumental in the drafting of our 14th Amendment, which defines citizenship. It gives us equal protection of the law. It gives us due process of the law. It applies all the Bill of Rights, which typically we're seen as federal. It applies them to the states as well. Thank you again. My name is Olu Osha. I'll keep you posted.